Somebody linked this in my email. Noam Chomsky is in favor of Russians' invasion or whatever. I don't know.
Link this to what's happening right now on the Ukrainian border. We've seen that there's talks about between Russia and the USA, and the first people to be actually on the talks are the USA and Russia, and not Europe in this case. So in this case, the USA is again controlling the process of how to deal with the diplomacy aspect of international affairs.
Well, it goes deep. A large part of the conflict goes back to the decision of the United States, first by George W. Bush, 2008, then reaffirmed by Obama, to invite Ukraine to enter NATO. Now, no Russian leader is likely to accept that. Ukraine is far too great geostrategic significance and also historical significance and cultural significance to Russia for Russian leaders, Putin or anyone else, to accept incorporation of Ukraine within a hostile military alliance. Long background to this. Now, this effort by the United States was vetoed by France and Germany, but that didn't mean anything. The United States proceeds with it. Now, there is an agreement, the Minsk II agreement. It's France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine. If the terms of that agreement were implemented, the crisis would be dampened. It probably would not be taking place. Now, neither Ukraine nor Donbass, the Russian region, have implemented the agreement. The United States has not pressed Ukraine to implement the agreement. So there's problems on all sides. But if Europe had a really independent role in world affairs, it could be acting in such a way as to bring this Minsk II agreement into operation. That would probably resolve the crisis. There's very good scholarship on this. One of the main scholars of the region, Anatol Yevin, has just written several articles about it, pointing out in detail how implementation of Minsk II could very likely resolve the crisis. Of course, that would mean...
Why? Why should they do that? Why would that be necessary? This is the wanting to form like a secessionist group, right? What's Minsk II? Well, the Minsk Protocol was the idea of like an autonomous region, right? Or was it the ceasefire? Hold on, the Minsk II, the agreement which followed multiple ceasefire, it failed to stop fighting the Donbass, thus followed by a new package of measures called Minsk II, which was signed on the 12th of February 2015. This too failed to stop the fighting. What were the details of this? Here, Minsk II. New package of measures meant to stop fighting, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Not a single provision of the deal has been fully implemented. Well, what are the provisions? Reduce conflict fighting, separatist forces, new offense. What concessions were made? Oh, measures. Here we go. So here's what Minsk II is. Immediate and full ceasefire. Great. Pull out of all heavy weapons on both sides to equal distance with the aim of creation of a security zone on minimum 50 kilometers apart for artillery of 100mm caliber or more, and a security zone of 70. I like how Ukraine just has to dignify having a security zone created within their own borders as a product of Russian imperialism. Effective monitoring and verification of ceasefire regime and pull out of heavy weapons by OSCE. Listen, here's the issue, okay? Any ceasefire that's this complicated is just going to be broken by Russia. Why would they not? Russia breaks every agreement. They already have an agreement to respect the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine, and they've been breaking that since 2014. Like, the problem here is not the agreement that you have. The problem is Russia. That's the issue. There is no agreement you could form with Russia that would keep them from slowly trying to creep into every country that's not NATO aligned, or every country that can't defend itself with nuclear weapons. Define the modalities of a full restoration of social and economic connections. Restore control over the state border to Ukrainian government in the whole conflict zone. Pull out of all foreign armed formations. Constitutional reform in Ukraine. Yeah, here it is. Constitutional reform in Ukraine, the key element of which is decentralization. and also approval and permanent legislations on the special status of particular districts of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts in accordance with the... Yeah, so it's... So not only do we have to create, like, a fucking demilitarized zone next to Russia, we also need to, like, just essentially federalize to give these territories more autonomy so that they can inevitably, you know, be further schlorped by Russia. On temporary order of local self-governance in particular districts. Yeah, here you go. Yeah.
Withdrawal of the U.S. call for Ukraine to join NATO. It would mean that Ukraine would have sort of Austrian-style neutrality, the kind that Austria had right through the Cold War, not part of any military alliance. It would mean that there'd be some kind of federation in Ukraine, which would provide a degree of autonomy to the Donbass region, demilitarization, a couple of other conditions. All of this is quite feasible, and it's very likely that it would simply end the crisis.
I don't get it. I don't get it.
That's not what's happening. The United States, under strong internal pressure from right-wing and also centrist opinion, is moving towards intensifying the crisis. So is Putin, by putting troops surrounding Ukraine, 100,000 of them. So it's as Yevhen himself says, this is the most dangerous crisis in the world right now, and also the most easily settled. It's both. Now this goes back much farther to the question.
The thing that I don't get is that, like, Chomsky has always been pretty understanding on the point that America will lie and cheat and steal to achieve its own material interests, but for some reason we're presuming the good faith engagement from Russia. First of all, the idea that a sovereign nation, Ukraine, should have to cede territory and autonomy just because their neighbor's bullying them is pretty weird to begin with. But then, like, but that's like, well, Russia, yeah, in spite of the fact that Russia, like, breaks every agreement they have, as long as it's good for, like, beneficial for them to do so, like, Artemy just tried to jump up the back of the desk and failed and grabbed my mouse and pulled it down by its cord and yanked it, and it went flying back and it hit the wall. Okay, hold on. Artemy, you want attention? You want attention? Yeah? All right. Fat baby.
Question of the means by which NATO was expanded. You go back to the collapse of the Soviet Union.
That was a Russian false flag attack.
There were several conceptions of how the Eurasia region should be organized. One of them, which was advanced by Mikhail Gorbachev and by Germany, Hans Dietrich Genscher, the German foreign minister. Both of them proposed a kind of Eurasian security system with no military blocks. Okay, so Lisbon to Vladivostok, singles, a region, no military blocks. Well, that was rejected by the United States. It was actually supported by Germany. A core part of this was unification of Germany, which the Germans...
What about what Ukraine wants?
Germans, of course, wanted. And the question was how this could take place. Remember, for Russia, unification of Germany is not a trivial matter. Germany alone had virtually destroyed Russia several times during the past century. So for Russia to agree, as Gorbachev did, to agree to allowing Germany to be unified within NATO, hostile military alliance, was quite a concession. But there was a condition. Condition was that NATO would not expand to the east. The phrase that was used was not 1 inch to the east. That meant East Germany. Nobody was contemplating broader expansion, at least in public. Maybe privately they were. NATO did advance to East Germany under Bush, and under Clinton, it moved all the way to the Russian border. Baltic states, other states, the Balkan states. This is a pretty, I mean, it could have been done in a way which would have eliminated, certainly eased tensions. There was what was called the Partnership for Peace in the 1990s.
The problem is that even if NATO had stayed exactly where it was at the end of the Cold War, like, why wouldn't Russia just slowly creep over until it reached that point? The problem is, like, we're leaving aside a lot of ethical shit here, you know? Like, should we just leave hundreds of millions of people to the wolves in the interim, where Russia just gets to eat them up in the way? I don't know. Like, I never get answers to this. It seems really strange. Some people told me that if Ukraine should have sovereignty, so should Donbass and Crimea, or Crimea. What would this mean and how would you counter that? That's an incredibly fucking idiotic idea. That's like saying that because Palestine deserves to not be oppressed by Israel, Texas should secede. The idea that all, like, just because by when we say Ukraine should have sovereignty, we're saying it shouldn't be invaded by a neighboring country. Whereas when they say Donbass and Crimea should have sovereignty, what they're saying is Russia should be able to annex them. They're using sovereignty in two different ways, which are meant to obfuscate the actual logistics of the situation. There is no free and independent Crimea or Donbass. There's only Crimea and Donbass being with Ukraine or with Russia. Those are the only two options. We do need Florida to secede, though? Maybe.
Which was a pretty sensible approach that contemplated expanding NATO or another general alliance to include the East European states, but to do it in stages, with varying from country to country depending on the circumstances, taking Russian concerns into consideration, even contemplating bringing Russia itself into this system, as incidentally Putin has suggested. These were all possibilities. They were abandoned in favor of what was called the Clinton Doctrine. Let's just expand militarily right to the border of Russia, militarizing, bringing them into NATO, weapon systems that are called defensive, but of course threaten Russia. All of this was done in a manner which was almost guaranteed to increase tensions. We're now facing it. Ukraine is a central part. And what's happening, as David correctly says, is extremely dangerous, but also has a solution, one in which Europe would play a central role. But that, of course, requires that Europe take up the option, which has always had, to become an independent force in world affairs. Europe has that option. It's rejected it. It's chosen to be subordinate to the United States. And as long as Europe does that, we'll be in serious danger.
And what do you envision as a way that Europe could become more independent? Should it become a United States of Europe, or should it try a new form of the European Union that, as we know it now, is very bureaucratic, complicated, and actually led by technocrats and the elite of the European nations? So in order to become really independent on the world stage, should it at least try to become a federation?
Well, the European Union has serious flaws, but also significant achievements. One achievement is that there's a change, a radical change from centuries of European history. For centuries, Europe was the most savage, brutal place in the world. The main task of European countries was to slaughter one another. This goes back centuries. The 30 Years' War in the 17th
Whites
century.
are savages.
Probably a third or more of the population of Germany was killed. And this continued through I don't have to review what happened in the 20th century. I mean, Europe virtually destroyed itself. Well, since 1945, that hasn't happened. That's a pretty significant change. Plenty of problems, but nevertheless, the move towards some kind of federation had a major success. Europeans are not slaughtering one another, not a small point. Things like the Schengen Agreement have been very valuable. The fact that you can travel from, France to Poland, Balkans without going through a border, a student in Italy can study in Germany. All of this is a great step forward. On the other hand, what you said is correct. The bureaucratization has been extremely harmful, and it's had very negative effects. Fundamental decisions, have been moved from the individual countries, Italy, France, and so on, to a bureaucracy in Brussels, the Troika, unelected, European Commission, unelected, European Central Bank.
This is a slightly strange and adjacent set of perspectives. I'm not that familiar with them. I don't really have any points in mind in either direction, I suppose.
Unelected, IMF, naturally. So these unelected bureaucracies are setting the major policies for Europe, and it's causing plenty of anger and resentment. What are called the populist reactions are in substantial part a reaction to the fact that deciding the kinds of policies that govern your own society have been taken out of your hands. It's radically undemocratic. And some of these policies, like the austerity policies, have been quite destructive and harmful. They were somewhat relaxed when the dangers that they were creating was beginning to be recognized. But we should bear in mind that to create a federation, the United States is, in many languages, that's the way it's still described. War, aggressive war, almost every year since its founding. We don't describe it that way, but the country was founded, and a battle has been, in one or another way, this conflict has continued right to the present. And we see it in all kinds of ways. Take, say, Iran. When the United States pulled out of the joint agreement, JCPOA, with Iran, Europe was furious. Europe wanted to maintain the agreement, which was working very effectively. Iran was living up to the terms of the agreement. International inspectors, including U.S. intelligence, completely agreed with this. It was working fine. The United States destroyed it and imposed very harsh sanctions on Iran to punish Iran because the United States had destroyed the agreement. You go back to when this happened, Europe was furious. They said, we're going to continue with the agreement. We're not going to observe the sanctions. We're going to, would be called centrist in Europe. Take Bernie Sanders in the United States.
Oh, no.
He's considered so radical that you can't even contemplate his proposals. An editor of the Financial Times, world's leading business journal, a couple of months ago, observed, this is partially a joke, but serious, that if Bernie Sanders was living in Germany, he could be running on the Christian Democrat program.
Oh, no.
Which is correct.
Was it Martin?
I don't think that's true. At all. This is like a common America line because they want to really overstate how left-leaning Europe is, but like Medicare for All, the Medicare for All plan that Bernie Sanders wants to propose is more comprehensive, to my knowledge, than any other healthcare plan on earth. There's no public healthcare plan that it's as radical as the one that he was putting forward. It was the most radical. It was more radical than literally any government in existence right now. His info is outdated. The CDU has moved right lately. Yeah, but like even then, no, I think Bernie would be considered pretty left-leaning. Also, like that's a weird form of analysis. You tailor the political positions that you can advocate for on a policy basis to the material conditions of the country that you're in. Maybe Bernie Sanders would be significantly more left-leaning if he was in a country that had a functioning welfare state already, because he wouldn't have to be building things from the ground up, basically. It's always been a weird kind of... It just seems like a very reductive take from somebody like Chomsky.
Wolf from the Financial Times.
Martin Wolf said the same thing. It's this was Rana Farhar. Wolf said pretty much the same. But it's too correct. If you look at his proposals, like universal health care, nobody questions that in Europe. It's routine. Free higher education. Germany has it. Finland, most of Mexico has it. Something as simple as maternal leave. Time for women to be with a baby after it's born. Everybody has that. The only countries that don't have it are the United States and a couple of Pacific islands that are ruled by the United States. And it's very, for the United States itself, it's an enormous problem. The healthcare system in the United States is a disaster. Has the most advanced healthcare in the world, but some of the worst statistics on maternal mortality, infant mortality, and many other measures. The United States is way behind.
Well, this doesn't seem related to the stuff that we're looking at right now. We're learning lots today. President Biden is giving an address on Ukraine soon.